Based on a true story, a fast food restaurant manager receives a call from an officer and complies with his every command. On a busy day, Sandra, the manager of a local franchise of a Chickwich chain, starts her day early by receiving delivery of bacon supplies. Afterward, she gathers the restaurant's crew for a staff meeting about the unclosed freezer the night before, causing a large amount of bacon to spoil. Despite the disinterested staff, Sandra continues to brief them about doing their jobs correctly because they expect a secret shopper to conduct a quality control audit of the restaurant today. She stresses that they must serve the right portion and order of food and maintain a clean and organized counter. However, the staff still find time to slack off, like how Becky and Marty are just talking by the counter while waiting for a customer. Instead of chastising them, Sandra approaches and announces that her boyfriend has called her dad about proposing to her. The two congratulate Sandra, but as she walks away, Becky mocks their manager's usage of a word, unaware that she's still listening. In the middle of a shift in a swamped restaurant, Sandra takes a break to answer a call from her boyfriend Van. Van wishes to pass by the store to see her and asks permission to go to his friend's place and drink beer. Sandra agrees to this, yet she reminds him not to get drunk. As they wait for new customers, Connie, Becky, and Kevin find time to complain about their shifts. Sandra catches Connie whining, so she immediately orders her to attend the condiment bar. Becky and Kevin exchange knowing glances about their manager's irritable mood. Sandra also comes after them, but Becky is spared from an earful when someone calls the manager's attention to answer a policeman's call. Sandra immediately goes to her office and talks to the person on the phone, who introduces himself as Officer Daniels. He claims to have spoken with the regional manager, Robert Gilmore, about one of her employees who allegedly stole money from a customer. Daniels then describes the offender as a young lady working at the register, fitting Becky's description. He further claims that they have a witness of the crime, and since they're also conducting a more significant investigation that involves the alleged perpetrator, the officer requests Sandra's cooperation in handling Becky. Sandra then summons Becky to the office, where she immediately confronts her about the theft. Becky denies the crime, but Sandra still reports it to the officer, so the man requests to speak with a young woman. Daniels interrogates Becky, asking her to explain the witness report. Becky insists she's innocent, prompting him to instruct Sandra to search her pockets for the stolen cash and confiscate her phone. After verifying that Becky's pockets don't have the stolen money, Daniels asks Sandra to search Becky's purse. Seeing it as invasive, Becky reminds Sandra that she has seen her working behind the counter and that she hasn't been to her purse since their staff meeting. However, Sandra dismisses her and aims to abide by the officer's instructions to get it over with. After taking Becky's purse from the employee's cubicle area, Sandra escorts her back to the office and reports that there isn't anything in her purse or pocket. Despite this, Daniels insists on a deeper investigation and thus orders Sandra to keep the lady in the office while waiting for his marked units. Sandra agrees, but she clarifies to the officer that they haven't had any trouble with Becky before, so she considers giving her the benefit of the doubt. The caller hints that if Becky has been doing things, she would have hidden it from them, which Sandra considers. When Daniels asks to talk to Becky again, the young woman tries to plead her case and answer the officer's questions truthfully. However, he intimidates Becky, making her silently follow his orders. When she insists that she doesn't have the money, the man asks to talk to Sandra again. He tells Sandra that there are two options to deal with Becky. The first involves taking her to jail with a lengthy investigation process, while the other option is for Sandra to search her personally. Both ladies are clearly against the idea, but the caller implies that the investigation might lead to a 90% chance of conviction, so the search might save Becky. In the end, they agree under the condition that Marty would do it. While Sandra is out to look for Marty, Becky is left alone to talk to Daniels, who asks the young woman to pretend that the investigation process isn't bothering her to make things easy for her colleagues. Out of nowhere, the officer also asks Becky about her brother, who apparently is still in trouble with the law. When Sandra briefs Marty about needing to search Becky, the latter protests, believing that Becky would never steal from someone. However, the manager is committed to following the officer's instructions. The search soon begins, and Sandra reports finding nothing after checking the young woman's discarded clothes. Still unconvinced, the officer probes Sandra to also check the lady's undergarments. The two women look at Becky apologetically, but they're left with no choice but to proceed. After removing the rest of her clothes, Becky embarrassedly covers herself with an apron from Marty. Despite failing to find the stolen cash, the officer persists. This time, he wants Sandra to take Becky's clothes into her car to prevent her from retrieving the money once they aren't looking. He continues that it's a standard protocol not to give the clothes back to the perpetrator unless the police have searched it, since they might have made alterations to hide things. Sandra becomes suspicious of the exaggerated orders and the fact that no officers have arrived at the restaurant. The caller claims that they can't get there immediately as they're are currently investigating Becky's house because of her brother's involvement in illegal substances. When Sandra tries relaying it to her employees, the officer stops her by saying that it's confidential information. He then reasons that Becky's clothes may contain traces of the substances, which could help them solve their case. With that, Sandra takes Becky's clothing, puts them in her car, and even leaves her car's passenger door unlocked, as per Danielle's instruction. However, as things in the restaurant get busier, Sandra tells the officer that she needs to go back to managing the store. Danielle agrees only if a trusted male employee could watch over Becky for security reasons, so Sandra enlists Kevin to do the task. When Sandra orients Kevin of the case, he finds it hard to believe as he personally knows Becky and her brother. He's more surprised to see his friend with only an apron on. Sandra soon leaves after she instructs Kevin to follow the officer's orders. The young man then talks to Danielle to inquire about the crime while also trying to defend her. Unbeknownst to them, the mysterious officer Danielle is merely a prank caller who's cozily sitting and drinking in his house. As their conversation continues, the caller begins to provoke Kevin's desire by ordering him to inspect Becky's body. Kevin immediately finds the man hilarious, so the prank caller asserts his authority, demanding the young man to respect and call him sir. He then orders Kevin to remove Becky's apron to inspect her body. After confirming with Becky that they've already gone through that, Kevin refuses to follow despite being threatened about disobeying an officer. He steps out and tells Sandra that he refuses to get involved since Becky is his friend. Because of this, Sandra talks to the officer again to apologize for what happened. Still insisting that someone must watch over Becky, Danielle asks if Sandra is married. She says she's about to be, so he asks if she trusts her fiancé and if he can come by. Sandra hesitates but calls Van anyway. Van later arrives at the restaurant, and Sandra takes him to the office where Becky is being held. She orients him about his task, though she sees that he's a bit drunk. As soon as Sandra leaves, Van gets interrogated by the caller. Similar to the order he gave to Kevin, he asks Van to check Becky's body for the stolen cash. Despite being a bit drunk, the man also finds the caller's orders ridiculous. So when Sandra returns to give them a drink, Van clarifies if he really needs to follow Danielle's orders, though he doesn't specify what it is. Sandra, who has been complimented for doing a good job on the investigation, seems to have enjoyed her involvement in the case. This makes her the easy pawn to also manipulate Van into following the officer's orders despite how ludicrous it sounds. After confirming that Sandra has left the room and may not return anytime soon, the caller begins giving obscene orders, insisting on having Becky remove the apron. As Becky refuses to follow, the caller asks to talk to her. While speaking to Becky, he threatens to lock her up in jail, even mentioning her possible involvement in her brother's case. The man then assures Becky that her cooperation could help lessen her sentence and even help her get off the hook. As she grows helpless, the poor victim agrees to take off her apron in front of Van. When the phone is handed back to Van, the caller asks him about Becky's private parts. He even asks the man to conduct a cavity search on the young woman, where she has to turn around and bend. After she complies, Van then asks if he can give the apron back to Becky, but the caller instantly stops him. Instead, he orders the man to make the victim perform jumping jacks to shake out the money that she may be hiding inside her. While the others are oblivious to what's happening in the back room, Kevin gets worried and tries asking about her brother's whereabouts by texting his friends. When he tells Connie of his worries, the lady only advises him not to mess with the police officers, so Kevin decides to let it go and return to work. After a while, Sandra briefly visits the room, and Van immediately makes Becky wear the apron. Upon learning that the investigation has no progress, the manager decides to talk to the caller, who assures her that everything is under control. Before Sandra can leave again, Becky pleads to stop the investigation, but the woman dismisses her. When Van and the caller are back into talking, the supposed officer gets notified that his phone's minutes are running out. He panics and hurries to top up his phone. He masks the situation by telling Van that he's having a problem with the investigation at Becky's house. Meanwhile, Kevin tells Marty that he dislikes the thought of Sandra leaving Van alone with Becky. However, both of them are in no position to oppose Sandra's decisions. On the one hand, the caller secures his minutes again. He then orders Van to spank Becky as a punishment for her disobedient plea to Sandra. Helpless and tired, Becky has stopped protesting and bends over Van's lap. The man wastes no time and carries out the order while seemingly enjoying the ordeal. When Marty finally gets to talk to Sandra, she asks about Van and Becky's situation. Sandra remains stern in believing that nothing could go wrong, even stressing that her boyfriend is guarding Becky while waiting for the police to arrive. Marty volunteers to guard Becky if the restaurant gets less busy, and the manager tells her that they will observe the situation. Due to Sandra's denial and strong faith that nothing could go wrong, Becky is forced to do something for Van, who blindly follows the indecent commands. As the manager later brings them food, she's greeted by silence and wonders why Van isn't attending to the phone. Consumed by guilt, Van mutters a small goodbye goodbye before leaving, and the ever-gullible Sandra even protests why her lover left without kissing her. Meanwhile, the unsatisfied caller again orders Sandra to get another male replacement to guard Becky. When Harold stands guard, the caller asks him similar questions and orders given to Kevin and Van. However, unlike Van, Harold immediately objects, and he reports to Sandra about the things the caller asked him to do. Sandra finally gets alerted, so she calls their regional manager to ask about her store's situation. To her surprise, she learns that Robert is unaware of the theft since he's been sick the entire day. Hearing this, Sandra speaks to the caller again, demanding to know who he is. After joking about ordering some food, he hangs up. Finally realizing that the man has conned her, Sandra turns silent, ashamed. Immediately, Kevin takes the phone and tries to call the number, but to no avail. After a while, the real police arrive at the restaurant to investigate the crime. They collect the hard drive of the surveillance video and interrogate the employees. When asked why she complied with the caller's requests, Becky defeatedly says she knew it would happen anyway. Soon, the police escort Becky safely. On the other hand, the mysterious man keeps the things he used in his prank call before greeting his young daughter. The detective assigned to the case continues to look for the perpetrator and eventually learns that the scheme happened in another state's fast food restaurant. Tracking down the stores where he bought the prepaid cell phones he used on the calls, the authorities eventually find the man, who's apparently a telemarketer. The police arrest him in his workplace. On the other hand, Becky meets with a lawyer to file a civil suit against Sandra. Her lawyer suggests suing the Chickwich National Corporation instead, to hold them accountable for the other crimes that span different branches and for not issuing policies and warnings against this kind of hoax. Sandra, who is now unemployed, has also ended her connection with Van. As she feels accountable for what happened, she accepts the interview with the journalist, where she is questioned about the incident. The woman tries to explain that her respect for the bureaucratic authority led her to follow the prank caller's orders. She admits that she was very foolish, yet she also believes she is a victim of the evil prank call. As the questions continue, Sandra's recollection of the events becomes hazy. However, with the surveillance footage, she cannot twist the story, leading Sandra's lawyer to advise her to skip the questions that'll only press her more. As Sandra looks at the footage of the incident, she tears up. To cover up her guilt, she instead resorts to making small talk with a journalist and gives a fake smile. Unfortunately, over 70 real incidents similar to Becky's have occurred in 30 US states.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this, turn on notifications and leave a like to help the channel out. Thank you for watching.